My name's Dawn Johnson. I'll be chairing the meeting for today. Before we proceed, can I just check that everyone is able to hear okay online? Someone could put their thumbs up or hand up. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. We have the agenda pack with papers available via mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. When I invite somebody to speak, could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so they can identify who is speaking? Can I also warmly welcome our member of the public, Nick Hall, and any media who are joining us here today. I advise that the meeting is recorded by the council. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Many thanks. So, Jamie, do we have any apologies for today?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Wren and from Councillor Hart. We have 5 councillors that I haven't heard from and are not online either, Chair. So that's short on them.
Okay, well, hopefully some are still on their way. We will need to keep an eye on whether we're quorate through the meeting, given our reduced numbers today, but hopefully we shall be sufficient in numbers for the meeting today. Okay, so we have the minutes from the previous meeting, and we need to agree the minutes from the meeting held on the 12th of March 2025. Is everyone happy to agree those meeting minutes? Thank you very much. Those off. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest from members in the room in the items on the agenda? Nope, we have no declarations of interest. Great, thank you. We're moving swiftly on. So we're now at item 4, which is public question time. And warm welcome to you, Nick Hall. And we have a question that you wish to present to us. You'll have 3 minutes from the start of your speaking. If you can, if you can just start whenever you feel comfortable, and okay. Hopefully we'll have a response for you once you've spoken.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good morning, everybody. And Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak today. So my name is Nick Hall. I'm a Pilton Parish Councillor, but for the avoidance of doubt, I am making this speech in a personal capacity today. You already have my written statement and questions about the ongoing public nuisances associated with Glastonbury Festival, and I'll just summarise 4 main points. So firstly, overnight noise. I know that Mendip District Council did not enforce the strict overnight condition that there should be no discernible and audible noise at residential properties. That's condition PN2. GFEL's commercial model now needs significant venues to operate throughout the night, and I conclude that Somerset Council can't fully enforce condition PN2 without compromising that commercial model. Second problem, helicopters. I've contacted the Civil Aviation Authority, CAA, and other agencies. All helicopter flights need written permission from GFEL under a CAA restricted airspace temporary, so-called RAT. So GFEL controls the number and location of helicopters, including the 50, which flew over Pilton Village on Monday morning of last year's festival. The CAA confirmed that there are no licensed heliports around the festival site. In 2025, it appears that GFEL is moving to a single heliport, and that heliport may need to be licensed by the CAA. And I assume that the Somerset Council planning team are already aware of the new heliport and its proposed facilities. The CAA informed me that the noise nuisance from helicopters lies with the Department of Transport. I approached them and they made it clear in writing that the nuisance is a matter that needs to be dealt with by GFEL and/or Somerset Council. So what is Somerset Council's policy on holding event operators to account for noise nuisance from helicopters? Third problem is off-site events, and one way to control the events is to insist that applicants for a temporary event notice provide a clear description of the area and also make it clear that only 499 people, including any staff, are on that area of land. Please can somebody explain why Somerset Council doesn't enforce this in line with the 2003 Licensing Act guidance? And finally, fourth, we need a fit for purpose community consultation model. The liaison meetings with the community are controlled by GFEL. Certain issues are downplayed, action tracking is sporadic. There were no minutes from the meeting on the 19th of February, etc. So we need this for improvements in the event management plan as well. So my conclusion is, given the public nuisance is a licensing objective and the ultimate responsibility of Somerset Council, then we can't accept the status quo. And I'd like the council to consider whether we can have the status quo. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nick, and for continuing to attend these meetings and raise the concerns of some of your fellow residents. I believe Chris Hall is going to provide a response for you, and then you will get a full written response by email following this meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hall, for your questions. I'll take them in sequence, if I may. So these responses have been provided by the Head of Regulatory Services. So in regards to the event management plan, it is GFEL's, so Glastonbury Festival Events Limited's, responsibility to produce the event management plan. They are reviewed by Somerset Council and other agencies. Therefore, it is our belief that there is sufficient oversight of these plans from the regulatory bodies, which includes Somerset Council. Once the licence is issued, there is no requirement for further consultation with the public on the operation of that licence. In addition to the consulting regulatory bodies, GFELs undertake meetings with local parish councils, both before and after the event, to allow for issues to be raised and discussed. There is also now, at the request of this scrutiny committee, a councillor engagement group that has been established to allow Somerset Council councillors to raise and discuss issues from the community directly with Somerset Council Service. Therefore, there is in place appropriate community consultation in regards to the licence itself. In terms of the alleged noise breaches, again, as was discussed at the Scrutiny Committee on October 2024, Somerset Council undertakes independent noise monitoring throughout the duration of the festival, and that's in addition to GFEL, who also have noise monitoring provisions in place. The noise monitoring undertaken in 24 did not identify any breaches of the licence conditions. In regards to the helicopters, the use of helicopters is not an activity licensable by Somerset Council's regulatory services. The environmental health team have no powers to deal with noise from helicopter flying. In terms of the 28-day planning rule and other planning matters, that is something that we will follow up with our planning service. At this point, I don't know if they're aware of the proposal to have a single heliport or not. We will follow that up internally. As you advised, GFEL, as a result of the feedback from residents, are making some changes this year, which you've referred to, as to how helicopters operate around the site, and we hope this will bring some improvements. But as I've said, we'll follow up with our planning colleagues. In terms of off-site events, the regulatory service team does not agree with the statement that our position is that the TENS limit is not really 499. As was explained at the meeting with the off-site camping providers, the limit to the TENS, or temporary events notices, was indeed 499, and that limit applied to the premises as they specify in their form as part of the premises thereof. The statutory form, of which we've now built an online version, provides for the following, and a quote: if you intend to use only part of the premises at this address, or intend to restrict the area to which this notice applies, please give a description as detailed below. So it's effectively a free form box within the template itself. In regards to your point on the GFEL liaison meetings, they undertake meetings with the local parish councils both before and after the event, as we've discussed, and that allows for local issues to be raised and discussed. And again, we repeat the point that the Scrutiny Committee requested a specific councillor engagement group that has now been established. Therefore, we consider that there is appropriate community consultation in place in regards to our control around the licence itself. That's the end of the response that I have, and we'll provide a formal written response to you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Hall, I would maybe suggest that you are in touch with your local councillors if there is another forum other than the parish councils that you may wish to contact if there is this new forum via the Scrutiny Committee with your local Somerset councillors, that perhaps you make sure you liaise with them if you find that the parish council route is not satisfactory.
Yes, I'm in touch with Councillor Sully, and so she's aware of these issues as well. So so I'm hoping to get some feedback from that kind of meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you very much for taking the time to attend today. And I'm sure this will be ongoing. And yeah, once you receive the response, please do follow through if there's anything further you need from us. Okay, thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the Scrutiny Communities Work Programme. So I'd like to invite members to add any new items to the work programme. Anybody had any particular items they would like to add going forwards? Yes, certainly. Jamie?
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of advise members, obviously the meeting calendar for 25-26 has yet to be confirmed. That will be agreed at full council later in May. The final draft is now sort of making its way round. I think the chairs and vice chairs of Scrutiny and other committees for their sort of consultation and sort of agreement to the dates in principle. I think it's likely that the next committee meeting date for communities will be sort of mid-June. Obviously, we've got quite a list there of forward items that the committee have added to the work programme at some time, but that haven't been allocated to a specific date. What I've suggested to two other scrutiny committees this week is potentially to do a sort of an informal online workshop with the committee and maybe the service, just to try and come up with a sort of a forward work programme for the next 12 months. So it gives a rough idea as to trying to allocate those items that are on the list, also allowing flexibility for items that have to come through at fairly short notice. The other committees have been fairly supportive of that approach, because I think it's a good way of managing the committee and the service's expectation as to what's coming to meetings in the next few months. So, that was just a suggestion, and I'll obviously discuss that with Councillor Wren upon his return.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. That sounds a good idea to me. If everyone's in agreement that we have a little gathering to just address which people feel are the most priority topics or subjects they would like brought to the first meetings in the next year. So we will, if everyone's had a look at the items that are on there, if that covers most of what everybody's been thinking of, that's great. But if there is anything, once you look at the forward plan items that you feel is missing, please do let Gwyl or myself know, and we can make sure that discussion encompasses everything that anybody would like raised. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Can we not move, I know there's no time level here, but the gypsy travel issue, obviously that's become a huge issue in Glastonbury now. Can we not move that sort of fairly near the top of the agenda or the timetable? Thank you.
I would agree with that. As many will be aware, in Taunton we've had a huge number of traveller encampments throughout Taunton on our parks that are still ongoing, I believe, Chris. I don't think they're all moved on yet. Yeah, and I know there are councillors who've been raising issues in Glastonbury for quite a while now. So I agree. I think that it does need to be up at the top of the agenda, but perhaps that can come, if Jamie will note that, and we'll perhaps bring that to the discussion when we'll look at what other topics other people might be particularly concerned with. I don't know if you've got a comment, Chris, on travellers.
Nothing specific on the current traveller situation. What I would say is, if we're going to alter where it is, it currently sits under Kirsty Larkin's area of responsibility, and I know she's setting up a working group, so we'll need to liaise with her as to how far forward we could bring that report when she's just setting that up, literally this week. So we just need to work through when she'd be able to report that to us.
I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but quite often most of the issues with movement of travellers happens April, May time. So once the travellers have moved through, are we unlikely to have the issues with the mobile travellers? I mean, I think Glastonbury is a slightly different situation because there's a lot of resident travellers. So we would have time to address for next year, presumably.
So yeah, we tend to see a spike of activity around the Easter period, and then potentially through summer as well, depending on where those traveller groups that are genuinely mobile traveller groups are moving to and from. As you say, the issues around Glastonbury are very different in terms of those who are more resident, and that will require a different approach. But we can talk that through with Kirsty in regards to the scope for that report.
Can I just ask, do we know whether there was a traveller a gypsy funeral or anything like that that sparked so many sites, groups of travellers being in the Taunton area? Because that is generally what would happen. But the nomadic way of life is from about March until October. Traditionally, travellers have always probably stayed put in the very depths of winter. Can I just say how sad I was over the weekend to be lambasted by multiple people slagging off, and I can't think of another word for this, the gypsies, especially in connection with the firing of the buses at Silk Mills Park and Ride, which, you know, I found that really distressing. And even more so when it appears that a 17-year-old Taunton lad has been arrested for said arson. And I just feel that people are so prejudiced. And I think that what happens is that sometimes local criminals think it's a good idea to create mayhem and havoc and mayhem in the vicinity where gypsies are, because they know the gypsies will be blamed for it. And I just think that, you know, it's beholden on us all to be caring about this sector of people and really try hard to find a way to find some sites so that they aren't in a position of having nowhere to go. And what we have to remember, I think, is that the definition of homelessness is having nowhere to put the structure that is your home. So this is a homelessness issue, particularly for many of those people in Glastonbury, and indeed people touring. They need somewhere that they can go, and you know they do move on generally quite quickly if they're truly traveller gypsies. It just stresses me how people are, and I include members of my own family in that. They are so, it's racist, actually. It's the biggest, worst form of racism here in this county, I think. Thank you. I've said my piece. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Hazel. Yeah, it's a complex matter, this, and many people have strong views one way or another on it. And I think we do need to keep an open mind. I wasn't aware the 17-year-old arrested was from Taunton. I didn't know that had been made public. But yes, there was a lot of speculation as to what had happened when all the buses were set alight. Unfortunately, yeah, the timing made for that speculation, particularly because of what's been happening in Taunton lately over the last few weeks with the arrivals. I think, you know, there has been a lot of difficulties at the Park and Ride with people not able to use that service where, you know, and they have felt threatened there. So I think there are two sides to every story, unfortunately. And it is something that we really do need to get to the bottom of, as to work out how we can make that situation a better situation for everyone. The Glastonbury situation, I think, is, as you say, very different. It's about people not necessarily being able to afford to live elsewhere or to find accommodation. My understanding is Glastonbury, you know, we've had a lot in the press about Bristol and the residents on the Downs, but I believe the numbers at Glastonbury far exceed those numbers at Bristol. So it's something that we really do need to address. And my concern is, Chris, if we have this working group, how long might we be looking at? Because we've certainly had it raised at this committee numerous times that Glastonbury needs to be examined as to what more might be done for that situation. My concern is that this could then, if it's a work group, move to another 6 months before we get a discussion on that.
Yeah, I'll certainly take those comments back. So this is an area that remains within your portfolio of work for community scrutiny, but no longer sits under my area. So this is a general fund housing requirement that now sits under adults and housing, but you are right that it's still your portfolio for oversight. So we'll take those comments and concerns back. We'll follow up with Kirsty, who's leading on it, and we'll see what we can do in regards to getting her here for the report.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Marcus, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I always struggle with forward plans because I never go, yeah, it's probably taken me 3 years to get to grips with them. And I'm looking at who makes the decision on what gets seen when, and how do we sort of make what we think is urgent and not urgent, because obviously the things we've just talked about are all quite urgent, and obviously things like the Glastonbury Wash Up Festival has to Glastonbury Wash Up Session, so it has to happen afterwards, etc. So that's a time thing. But things I'm looking at this home finder policy and annual policy review, and that probably links into what was just being talked about there with the issue of homelessness. Am I right in saying that I think they have they review it every year? So is that at a certain time, or can we push it up the agenda so we have a little bit more information and say before the board all sits down and says this is our policy for the year, and by this time it's all too late? I think that made sense.
Yeah, so sorry, don't know the answer to that one. Again, I'm going to have to pick that one up with Kirsty. Again, that sits under the general fund side, so I'm out of touch with what's happening on that side now. It's moved away from my control, so happily pick that up and again advise in terms of the forward plan.
There are sometimes times when it's better to be scrutinising certain areas due to reports that are being produced, but where we have something that is really pressing in communities, I think we need to have capacity sometimes to bring something forward, even if it doesn't necessarily align with a reporting process that's taking place. Thank you.
If I may make a comment, Kirsty Larkins has been mentioned quite a lot. Would it not be appropriate to invite her to our next meeting?
We can invite her.
I think it would be dependent on where they're at with that piece of work. I understand from what Chris said, it's only just sort of started in terms of that working group. So I would only probably want her to come here when it's particularly relevant for her to do so. But
yeah, if I may, Chair, I think it's important that we're focusing our questions around the agenda items. There's not currently anything on the agenda, but I appreciate we're talking about forward plan. So if there is a report for her to present, then naturally she will attend this committee because you follow that oversight. If there are questions that you have that are coming to your mind now, I'm happy to take those away and get you responses to the committee. And equally, if there's anything you think of in advance of the next committee, we can obviously receive those and ask Kirsty to attend for those specific items.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry, I don't want to labour this too much, but it's obviously a topic that's coming up a lot, the Glastonbury situation. And there may be a case that even if the work group hasn't reported, just an update on what the situation is and what can be done currently before a work group could be useful to members of the committee. But we'll feed that back and we'll look at this forward plan and hopefully incorporate most of the comments that have been made. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions. We will continue to work on the forward plan and liaise. Jamie will perhaps set up a meeting to discuss. Thank you. So we now move on to item number 6, which is the month 11 budget monitoring report, which is pages 17 to 26 in your agenda pack. I'd like to invite Chris Hall to present on the report on behalf of Christian Evans, who's given his apologies for today, I believe. And then if anyone has any comments or questions, please contribute afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So yes, I'm going to do a very poor impression of our head of finance business partner in Christians, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. And that coincides with our finance business partner, Kerry Heppel, also being unavailable today. The report and the presentation in the pack demonstrates our position in terms of the old community services executive directorate area. So there are parts of the organisation where we're operating in the new world, i.e. the new community places and economy. However, we are still reporting on the finances in the old world, so the old executive director area and the old service director areas. So this is a reflection on what is now part of community place and economy, but is a modest part of it. All of that said, and I am trying to move the slides on, there we are. All of that said, we are reporting a very positive picture. So the net budget for communities was just under 33 million. Per annum. So that's the revenue budget, and that excludes all of the HRA transactions. So the housing revenue account is reported separately, and that constitutes over £50 million of revenue on an annual basis. This also doesn't touch on our capital spend programme. All of those are reported corporately through Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee and then onwards to Executive. But this gives you an oversight of the services under your direct portfolio and their financial performance. You'll see that we continue to deliver an underspend. So that underspend is growing. That's a good thing, of course, in terms of our month 11 position. And we expect that to at least hold, if not improve slightly further as we get through the year-end process. So we're clearly reporting a month which has gone by some time ago at this stage, and the finance team are now working on year-end accounts. There is a statutory requirement to close down the year and then submit our accounts. So we don't yet have the end of year position for all of Somerset Council as yet. Do not spend money unless we are absolutely required to do so. Active position for Somerset Council. This underspend is born out of services being told to cut back on spending, to not spend money unless we are absolutely required to do so, either in health and safety terms or in some statutory or legal requirement. So there are consequences, but the underspends are made up of a range of services all across the portfolio, reducing their expenditure where they can, as well as some other positivity in terms of income. So some of these might be reported as underspent or overspent, others might be underachieved or overachieved because they are very much income dependent. So when we think about services such as the crematorium, it's a demand-led service that receives external income. So whilst they have a budget, the budget is clearly predicated on an assumption about that income during the year. So I will paint a positive picture in terms of the budget because it's supportive of the overall council position. And when we see all of these collated for the outturn of the whole of the council, we anticipate a further positive message there. And positivity in terms of underspend means that we will call less upon the reserves than we originally thought we might have to when setting the 24-25 budget. And the less we call upon the reserves in 24-25, clearly the healthier position Somerset Council gets itself into. So I'm naturally talking quite positively about the work that each of the services have done to not only stay within budget, but actually contribute to the wider challenges around the council. The next slide in the pack looks at the MTFP savings tracker forms and the difference between our position at month 10 and month 11. So there were a range of savings that we said we would deliver during 24-25, and all of those savings were written into the budget. So if a saving is unachievable, that is a pressure for the budget in that given year. Everything that is achieved or is on track to be achieved, and in fact, when you look at month 11, we have got a scenario where we've either achieved it and it's done, banked and is saved, or we have a couple of unachievable items. So all of those that are achieved means we've met the budget expectation and we've delivered on the MTFP savings that you all approved as part of full council. Those that are unachievable, I will caveat by saying they are unachievable yet. So taking the example of the Taunton crematorium fee increase, that fee increase was applied. It's showing as unachievable because we have yet to achieve the whole income growth that we anticipated. So we have done our bit in terms of increasing the fees and charges, but clearly as a demand-led service, we are dependent upon those using and paying for that function. And similarly with the Minehead Harbour fees, the increase has been applied, but there is a very small user base within the Minehead Harbour, in fact all of our harbours, both of our harbours, and therefore we struggle to see the growth being realised in those areas, very much dependent upon individual user factors. Again, I hope you'll see this as a positive move. From month 10, we've been able to clarify that the on-track savings that were identified have moved into achieved. You'll also see that one of the at-risk savings in terms of the lifeline income, one of those, or in part had been achieved, in part was at risk, and actually all of that has now moved in to being achieved. So this tends to happen at the tail end of the year anyway, because where we're income dependent, we're not going to declare something as achieved until actually we've seen the profile of that income. So again, a positive story, a couple of challenges. These increases are written into not only 24-25 budgets, but also written into, of course, 25-26 budgets. So we haven't reversed any of these. We're saying not achieved yet. There will still be an expectation in what is now the current financial year, and we intend to deliver on those in so much as it's within our control. The report itself, in terms of recommendations, is realistically asking you to note the content and then challenge any of those that you would like additional information on. I haven't been notified of any specific questions or points that any members want to challenge or scrutinise, so I haven't prepared any specific responses. And if I can answer any today, clearly I will, but there may be some detail I need to take away and discuss with the individual service directors or heads of service for those services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, and great to see that it's looking like the year end will end in a very pleasing position. And you know, my thanks to all the staff who have worked really hard to deliver those situations where the finances are looking very secure. So thank you for that. Do we have any questions to Chris on the finance budget report?
Chair, just say if I'm wrong on this, but we have an issue, especially within my division at the moment. I've been emailed constantly about public toilets that are being closed, for example, at the Memorial Hall toilets in Wincanton. But down here it says it's an underspent, but there was a conversation with the town council with the devolution that it will go towards the town council, and I believe it's about £20,000. I think it's per year that it was to keep the upkeep. But I was just wondering, so if there's an underspend, is it going to all the devolution areas? So for all the areas across Somerset with public toilets, would they be closed and then given to the town councils, or is it just my area? You haven't got an answer now, obviously, because it's quite an in-depth question, but it's just been quite a hot topic within my division recently. And as seeing an underspend on public conveniences, it was just a question I just wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll do my best. So in terms of the devolution proposals, the saving that comes to Somerset Council is effectively replaced, or rather transitioned across into those other areas of service. So effectively, if we make a saving by transitioning an asset, that saving, and let's use a nominal figure and say it was £10,000, that £10,000 saving to Somerset Council is written into the MTFP. It stays within Somerset, but there'd be no transition of funds along with the transfer of assets or the devolution of services. That 10,000 saving in public toilets will then go to fill a gap elsewhere or a pressure. Predominantly that's adults and children's, but of course there are a range of pressures that exist across the authority. So what we might be seeing here in that specific budget is an expectation of the saving we would make when we devolve or transfer the assets. And then what we find is that we can make a commitment within the MTFP to make a saving, and sometimes we are seeing additional savings come out that weren't specific to the budget, but actually there was a maintenance pot that we are now seeing an underspend within another part of the service. So any underspend here is a good thing and shows that the devolution in Somerset's case has worked, but the transition to public toilets to the individual towns and parishes didn't go with any money. So any underspend here is supporting the council's broader financial pressures. In regards to whether the individual toilets are open or closed, I would need to take some advice on that and have to come back to you, I'm afraid, because I'm not fully au fait with each of the deals. So I'll do that rather than mumble on.
Thank you both. What I would say is the devolution down to Taunton Town Council has worked very well indeed, and I believe they are for the first time not getting all sorts of emails about the state of their public toilets following devolution. So I think there is definitely a case for local control creates better facilities for all. Any other questions to Chris? Councillor Kravis.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's always a sense of like groundhog day. We get this one every month, don't we? Yeah, I mean, I think probably linking into the previous question actually, because obviously of those savings that have been made, obviously it looks quite good for Somerset Council because we're making savings, although as we all know, that £3 million, there's probably been an awful lot of hard work by the team to save, and I do worry about the pressure on everybody to make those savings. And what is, simple thing is, take a look at a street. Does it look as good? Well, actually, we've saved £500,000, so that's okay. But my question would be, I suppose, is how much of those savings actually being passed down in devolution to town council? So actually, the public aren't saving the money because it's going on their precepts. I mean, I think you could. I mean, I think you look at Taunton's precept now. It's probably as big as West Somerset Council's was at one point. Not quite. And that's not a criticism, by the way, just to remind you of urban district councils. So there's that side of it, and I do worry about the pressure on, because obviously we set a budget, then there's pressure on people to save extra money because we need to save the money for whatever for various reasons. But I worry about whether those savings or the pressure going forward is sustainable. And how we do it. I don't expect an answer, Chris, because it's probably a political decision more than anything else. But I do have a concern that the amount of pressure being put on individual centres to save money ends up being too much. Now, some members of the public could turn around and say, well, that's because you waste too much when it comes to councils and everything costs more when it comes to councils. So this could be seen as a good thing. But at the same time, you need staff in place to provide those services. And it's no good if the pressure and being met to, and I suppose they're not KPIs, but being pressured to make those savings. If there's that difficult to make, that pressure can then have a knock-on effect that we don't see for several years. And there was a specific question I did have, but I think I probably just, it was actually more of a detailed question, more of a question I didn't quite understand. It was in the report. It says environmental health is forecasting an underspend, an increase of 6.4. This is due to an increase in income recovery from private sector housing, and I just didn't know what it meant. So I wondered if, wondered what that actually means in detail, and actually what that income recovery is. Apologies if I should know, and I don't know.
I think I can answer most of those, although I might look to Sarah if she's online to answer the one around private sector housing, and if not, we'll take it away. But in terms of the devolution, I just want to make sure we're all absolutely clear. The saving is to Somerset Council because we are no longer providing that service. The service is transferred to the town, parish or city council, and they are providing that service. And as you rightly say, in many instances, are increasing their precept in order to do so. So in terms of the taxpayer, they will continue to pay Somerset Council at the same rate. And as we've seen through council tax setting, actually council tax has gone up. But for Somerset Council, we are spending less on service A because it's been devolved, and we can utilise that money to support service B where there is an existing pressure. And all of that has been written into the MTFP. So where we have individual devolution deals, each of those are costed in terms of the savings proposal, and they are then profiled depending upon when that service transitions, because not all of them were for the 1st of April, and then our budgets are updated to reflect that. In terms of the sustainability of the budget savings, some of these are the variable management budget, so there are the things that we can choose to do, so therefore we can continue to defer maintenance on certain assets or certain responsibilities. We can't defer that forever, where there will get to a pinch point where things become more critical, but there are some management alterations to service standards at a low level, not ones that require consultation, but we can make some alterations. There are also things that we're seeing come out of the budget this year in terms of over recovery of income or underspend. So we could forecast some of that to year end, as we always do. And in setting the 25-26 budget, we know that there was too much money in leisure, and therefore we have taken that money out. So in 25-26, you won't see such a big underspend in communities. Obviously, it will be reported as community, place and economy at that stage, but you won't see that large leisure underspend, because not only have we forecast it, but we've said that is a sustainable additional budget, and we are going to take that out and we're going to move it to an area of the council where there's a pressure. So we won't continue to see the level of underspends that we've seen in communities rolling into 25-26, because we've used that to support other services. But apologies, Sarah, I don't know if you are able to answer the question.
Yeah, thanks. I'll give it a go. I haven't got all the information in front of me on that particular budget, but I'll give it a best shot. Essentially, the detail around that private sector housing income will be charges we make around HMO licensing. What I would add, though, is that that's a budget that's been sat in the wrong place for largely since vesting day. So I would need to definitely look into it to make sure it's actually up, or whether it's just that the funds have come across from the other side of General Housing Fund, where it was kind of separated and brought together as one at vesting day. So not a great answer, I'm afraid, but I will come back to you with the actual detail. But I suspect it's possibly more bringing the accounts in line than an actual up on any income.
Any other questions from anyone in the room? I don't believe we've got any online. I just wanted to ask about the unfilled posts, because some of the savings seem to be attributed to vacancies still held within some of the director areas. And obviously this is looking great for this year, but we need to start looking at next year and whether those savings are sustainable going forward into the next year, or have we made the savings? You know, how's the next year going to look? But if we were to fill some of those unfilled posts, it's that, how much pressure do you imagine that's going to put on to next year's budget planning? And also, I just want to check about markets. I don't remember seeing markets in the red before. Is that something that's just suddenly happened, or have I missed it previously?
I'll talk about vacancies if I may. So we've known for some time during 24-25 that there would be a large scale workforce restructure. We put in place a number of control panels to cut back on organisational spending, as well as to challenge whether the recruitment of certain roles was the right thing to do as we head into a workforce transition. Therefore, what you're seeing in this budget are vacancy underspends, because rightly we held posts vacant so that we had a more stable workforce as we moved into workforce transitions. And what I mean by that is, should we go out and recruit to all the vacancy roles we had during 24-25, knowing that come 25-26, there would be significantly fewer roles. So we chose not to recruit to posts, hold the vacancy, and what we're seeing is some of that saving in year. The new workforce structure went live on the 1st of April, and there was a reduction of 555 FTE roles, so more roles than that, but FTE equivalent, full-time equivalents. 555 of those roles were taken out of the organisation, and the money that sits alongside those. The tangential link here is that the 81, I think, of those were compulsory redundancies. So all of the others were either through the voluntary redundancy programme, or they were vacant roles being deleted without consequence to an individual. So there's a positive story that sits alongside this. But on the 1st of April, we started the new year with the new budget for the new workforce structure. We haven't populated every single role yet, but our aim is to do so. We don't intend to hold vacant roles deliberately at this stage. We want to recruit to all of those that are in the workforce restructure plans, because the teams need the resources. And therefore you won't see an underspend of this scale directly linked to vacancy rates for 25-26, or at least I hope we won't, because clearly there are some challenges in recruitment for certain areas. There was another question, I've forgotten what it was. Sorry, markets. Again, sorry, Sarah, I don't know if you can answer that one, or we'll take it away if not.
Yeah, the markets obviously have transferred now to the city, town and parish councils in that former Mendip area. So you've stopped sharing your screen. Chris, so I can't see the actual figures there in front of me now, but assuming it was for 24-25, we were in line to achieve the income. I think red was just about around the reassurance. Let's see if I can see the tiny little writing.
It's, yeah, the very bottom line, it's a £13,000 underachievement of income.
Yeah, so for 24-25, yeah. So as far as I'm aware, we were on track for that. So that's just showing that actually we're struggling with that final 13,000. I haven't seen anything else to say that we're going to achieve that, but there may be some accounting left to do, because obviously with the markets devolving over, there'll be some changes to those budgets anyway going forward. So I'll look into that, Dawn, for you.
Yeah, obviously it's not in the scheme of money, it's not a huge amount, but I was just curious to know what was driving that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can work that through for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And if we have no further questions, oh, nope. Thank you very much, Chris, for covering for Christian excellently there. I think we got answers to most of the questions, so job done. And thank you again to the team and the directors for all the work they've done to manage the budget so well. We have, you know, this community scrutiny had a really positive lot of work taking place to address some of the financial challenges of the council. And I think all credit to the team for all the work that they've been able to do. Thank you. So we are now at item 7 on the agenda, which is the HRA housing landlord options. And I'd like to invite Chris Hall again to present on this report. Busy meeting for you, Chris. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is intended as an introduction to the landlord housing options appraisal. This is covering the landlord services, as the name suggests. So this is not about Home Finder. It's not about our general fund activity. It's all about the properties that Somerset Council are responsible for, having inherited from the previous 2 stock holding district councils, and effectively the acknowledgement that there are currently 2 different ways of delivering services to those tenants, and actually it would be far more streamlined and beneficial for the tenants were there to only to be one. So I will take us through the slides. I'm more than happy, Chair, if there are questions as we go, if that's helpful. There are a few slides. I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. Now, for some of you, you will know this information already. So for some of you, this won't become as any surprise, but I'm conscious that clearly there are 110 members across the council, as well as who knows how many people who are listening to this online. So if you know this already, that's great, but it's not intended to be patronising in any way, shape or form. So we, Somerset Council, are the stockholder. So in regards to this discussion, I am referring to the council housing stock, the garage stock, the shops, and any other assets that are owned within the housing revenue accounts. I'm not talking about our commercial investment properties. I'm not talking about our office accommodation. I'm specifically talking about those residential properties owned by the HRA, so housing revenue account, HRA. So there are roughly, and 10,356, I say roughly because that number goes up and down. We have just as a council committed to over £130 million worth of growth within our council stock portfolio over the next 5 years. Last week, I signed off 112 acquisitions into the council housing stock, and I also signed off 3 disposals under right to buy. So the numbers go up and down. What we've got is 2 housing landlords that deliver those services on behalf of Somerset Council, and a split of that stock between the 2. So 4,157 at time of writing, managed by Homes in Somerset. You may know them as Homes in Sedgemoor. They changed their name on the 1st of April to Homes in Somerset to reflect the fact that they are covering a wider geographical boundary, and now they accommodate all of the housing growth in terms of managing that through the housing development team. So the housing development team is hosted by Homes in Somerset, but they deliver housing stock growth for Somerset Council across the Somerset area. There is no longer a geographical boundary there. We also have just under 6,200 of our council homes managed by Somerset Council's in-house service, i.e. those are people wearing a Somerset Council lanyard, operating directly to us and exist within our council organisational structure. So those people are doing everything from tenancy management to antisocial behaviour, estate management, and managing the properties themselves. So we have a trade workforce that's in-house within the Somerset Council in-house service. Both of those teams are performing well. So we don't have a situation here where we need to rescue one or other side of the service, but there is duplication as a result of having two. They're also both quite small. So when we look at regional reporting, we tend to look at benchmarking that is for for stock holding that is either below 10,000 stock or above 10,000 stock. Now, for Somerset Council, we own all of it and we're above 10,000. But in terms of the landlords, they will be looking at benchmarking at a below 10,000 stock level. So there are some differentials and there is some element of influence and ability to respond. So this is a heavily regulated area, as I'm sure you can appreciate. The Building Safety Act has come into place and places all manner of regulatory requirements on stock holding landlords. And our ability to react to that is more complex as one council with two landlords than it would be as one council with one landlord. There is duplication there. You're going to hear me say that time and time again, probably. In terms of the options appraisal itself, there is no requirement on Somerset Council to undertake an options appraisal. We could carry on as we are, but we do think there's an opportunity here that comes about from having a single approach. We think there's just duplication, as I've said already, but we also think there could be confusion for customers. So historically, we have customers that are used to having a landlord that was either Somerset West and Taunton District or Sedgemoor District Council, and the stock holding is geographically within those ex-district areas. But we want to see stock growth across Somerset. We want to broaden the council stock provision, and they will no longer be limited to those prior district areas. So you could have a scenario where you have tenants very close to one another, but actually they phone a different phone number for their repairs. They have a different communications approach. They have a different mechanism, and in some cases, slightly different policies. So it doesn't quite make sense for our tenants the longer this continues. So there is an ambition here, borne out, and it's described even as part of the unification process around simplification of the service. We want customers to be able to know where they go for what level of service, and we want that to be standardised across Somerset. Standardised in the sense of everybody gets the same opportunity to housing and they get the same maintenance standards and capital programme opportunities. We do anticipate that there'll be savings from this process. So if we have two currently and we go to one, you would by default expect to see some economies of scale fall out of this. And also in terms of that planning and policy making, we would expect to see that become more streamlined and efficient. So that we do expect there to be savings from the process. Any savings go back into the HRA, or rather any savings never leave the HRA. They don't come anywhere near the rest of the council in terms of the general fund pressures. They are a ring-fenced fund and they are used to support enhancement of the housing stock and housing growth potentially. So the scope of the appraisal will include management of the existing and future stock, as well as our responsibility to leaseholders. So there are a number of properties, just around 600, that we are the freeholder of, but leaseholders are in place and we have legal responsibilities towards them also. There are some limitations, so I want to set out really clearly what this isn't. So it is not an opportunity for Somerset Council to find a saving route through our housing service and then plug gaps that exist or financial pressures that exist elsewhere within the general fund. It is a legally ring-fenced fund, and any opportunities financially will be supporting the HRA business plan. You'll remember that when we approved the budget for the HRA, not only did we approve it for 25-26 on a balanced basis, but there was also a balanced MTFP horizon for the forward 5 years. We do see some challenges later into the HRA 30-year business plan, but as it stands, it's fully balanced. It itself doesn't have an immediate or pending financial challenge, but we would want to see that the HRA is financially efficient, for the best delivery for our tenants. This is not an amalgamation with other housing providers. It's all about our own stock. We are not looking to other providers, the private sector, in any way. This is simply about our tenants and what service they want and see that we can provide for them. It is not a large-scale voluntary stock transfer. The process for a large-scale voluntary stock transfer is very different. It requires a tenant's vote. This is not that. Stock transfer is effectively a sale of the stock. So we would go to market and say, who would take this off our hands? In coming to this point in the options appraisal process, we commissioned Savills to do a piece of work for us, and they look at the net present value of our stock. So they take, well, what is its current value and what are the financial obligations over the next 25, 30 years? And what they've identified is that it has a negative net present value. So once you deduct the cost of managing that stock over that period from the perceived value, it is in a deficit position. It's a paper exercise. It doesn't mean the council's got a problem, by the way, but in terms of, is there a marketplace to sell our stock to a private provider? No, there isn't. There is also the level of debt that we hold within the HRA. So we deliberately brought ourselves into the self-financing regime and bought the stock effectively out of government. We have over £100 million worth of debt. That's all being fully serviced within the HRA business plan, but you would have to take that into consideration if you were going to sell the stock. It would be the equivalent of selling your house and trying to keep the mortgage. So both of those would have to be balanced off at that point. So there's a negative position, and therefore we are not looking at a stock transfer. Just so I'm absolutely clear, all the options being considered here retain the stock owned by Somerset Council. So we will engage with tenants around this, but it is not a referendum. So we are not asking tenants to vote on which provider you would prefer to see. What we're asking them to do, and we'll engage with an external consultant, is what do they value in the current management of the stock at the moment? What do they want to see improved? So there will be open questions rather than would you prefer one over the other. The rationale for that is because we actually want to understand what tenants value in the service as it is so we can protect it, but also want to understand if we're going to invest further into the HRA stock, where do we best do that? Do the people want to see more energy efficiency or do people want to see more stock? Do they want us to shorten the programme around kitchen replacements, or is it landscaping arrangements that are really causing them concern? So we want to get an understanding of what really matters to our tenants. This is all about tenants. We don't have a conversation about our tenants without our tenants. So this is heavily focused on what they want to see, but it is not a referendum. The other reason it's not a straightforward referendum or vote is because what we know is that people generally don't like change. And therefore, if it was an out and out vote, well, we've got 6,000 tenants in one stock and 4,000 in another. So we need to ensure that we, for Somerset Council, are getting the right answer, not solely, well, which has got the highest stock and which tenants would prefer not to be disrupted in any form. So what does an options appraisal entail? So it will review the current performance and cost of the two operating models. It will review any gaps or differential in service provision. So there is set regulatory requirements that both landlords uphold: gas safety, electrical safety, thermal efficiency, and so on. And there is a vast list of our statutory requirements. But there are some things that one service may or may not do at a slightly different level voluntarily, and there are some areas of the service where they might provide additional support. So when we think about the in-house service and there's a civil contingencies incident, we will quite quickly call upon them and their vehicles in order to help us manage that incident. And we don't tend to do that so much with homes in Somerset. We've never really asked them to do that for us, and I'm sure they would. But when we start to compare costs, we just need to bear that in mind. So if there are any outlying costs, we need to understand why there might be a difference. We need to understand, as I said, what tenants value within the future and current service. We intend to use an external consultant to engage with tenants. We need to make sure it's fair and independent. So whilst the decision will ultimately be for Somerset Council members as to which approach is taken, there are experts in this field who have done this numerous times before. They know what the right questions to ask are. They know the best models to engage in our tenants, and they can be independent. They can provide their recommendations to council independent of whatever we might think about a particular service or model, and they can evidence that. So that's really important to us and to tenants that their voice is heard, and it's an independent voice at that. It will ultimately result in a decision for council. So we need to consider which model best delivers the tenant requirements, as well as being affordable for Somerset Council long term. So if they come forward with a model that says, here's a great opportunity, but it's going to cost you twice as much as it currently does, clearly that's not within their scope of works. But actually, on the basis that we operate both of these models now, we're not expecting to see any financial shockers. What we do need to consider is the current stock condition of our property to make sure that when we are looking at expenditure on a per house basis, we are comparing not only the finances, but actually the service standards and the overall condition of that stock. We need to consider any risks to the council. So the different models have slightly different risks, and we need to make sure that those are considered and understood. And we need to obviously come back to council with a recommendation, and we'll talk about the timetabling of that in a moment. In terms of the project governance, this is how it works. I apologise if it's a bit small, and I've got a couple of names wrong, I'm afraid. So I'll talk you through those as we go. But ultimately, this will be a decision put to the executive. Our expectation is that decision will come via community scrutiny, and the question at the end is how you want to be engaged in this process. Clearly, the lead member is taking a significant role in this, and then we have a steering group that's set up that I am leading on behalf of the council. So I'm not here to promote either model. I'm not here to represent the in-house service or homes in Somerset. I'm here to ensure that Somerset Council gets a model that's deliverable and meets the tenants' needs. We've then got a couple of internal staff helping us around project controls. So Wendy and Andrew are supporting that with us. And then we have a team of people made up from both homes in Somerset and the Somerset Council internal service provision. So I am kept clear of the two models, if you like. My job is to oversee the delivery of the project. You'll notice Craig Green name on the Homes in Sedgemoor side. I have mistakenly put him down as a board member. He's not a board member, but he is the vice chair of STAC, and STAC is their advisory committee. So I've made an error on that side. And just to balance things out, I've made an error on the Somerset Council side as well, in that I have accidentally excluded Kirsty Larkins, who also sits on the Somerset Council side and that part of the team. Yes. What does this mean for tenants? Well, what it means is that we will be actively engaging them for their opinion on the current and future service. So open-ended questions, independently sought. They'll be asked about outcomes rather than the individual model. They will have a say, but not a vote. So we want to understand their position, but we will not be asking them to vote on the change. We need to be really clear with tenants to prevent any concern that this has no change to their property ownership. Somerset Council own it now. Somerset Council will continue to own it in the future. It's just which model will we use to manage that stock. And it doesn't trigger a change to rent or service charges. So simply selecting a new model does not give the authority for us to change rent or service charges. That happens in a very structured way, and there's a government rent cap in place, as I'm sure you're aware. So that is a normal annual process influenced by the government position, and there is no change. So I wouldn't want any tenants to think, oh, I'm going to lose my house, or you're going to put my rent up as a regard to this. That is not the case. There will be a change of brand for some, because ultimately we'll be going to either wholly managed by Homes in Somerset, or either wholly managed by the in-house service within Somerset Council. So depending on which model is chosen, there'll be a change of brand for those moving across. We have every faith that that can be done seamlessly, and whilst we don't yet know the answer and what the transition plan might look like, we've experienced moving people between those two models in the past. We'll also engage with other stakeholders. So I've talked about that predominantly this is about the homes, but there are other stakeholders involved. So there are leaseholders involved in this process. We also have some HRA owned shops and we need to engage with them and those who rent garages from us. In terms of what it means for the employees, well, they've been made aware of the options appraisal and I'm starting to launch this formally, both with tenants and members and employees over the next 2 weeks. So there are a series of meetings. There is an all-member staff briefing. So there's an all-member briefing happening next week. I think it's next week, to which, as the name suggests, all councillors will be invited to understand what's happening. We're doing a similar event, or numerous events actually, to cover our employee base. So both for Homes in Somerset, so I'm doing a meeting with them and they'll see slides very similar to this, but with an emphasis on employment. And we're doing the same thing for our in-house teams, both online and face-to-face for those trade staff working from the depot. So that will happen over the next couple of weeks. We are not engaging in formal consultation with our employees yet because we don't have anything to consult on. There is no recommendation yet. At the point at which there is a recommendation, we'll need to take a view on, do we consult in advance of a decision by members, or do we get the decision by members and then consult? And again, that might be model dependent. So depending on which way this goes, it might be that we need more time for transitions in one direction than we do for transitions in another. But either way, this is going to result in a restructure of some description. So you'll recall, I'm sure, that the HRA were not included in the organisation-wide workforce restructure because of this. We didn't want to put them through that organisational restructure and then through another one when we have a single model. That wouldn't have been right or fair. So this is their equivalent of workforce restructure. There will be a restructure that comes from this. And either of the likely outcomes will result in a 2P transfer. So we anticipate that members will take the recommendation. I know we don't know what it is yet, but we're optimistic that members will accept that recommendation because it will be data led, and then we will seek to transition the workforce and all of the service, of course, but it will result in a 2P transfer from one to the other. So 2P, as I'm sure you're aware, is the transfer of undertakings and protection of employment regulations. And whilst I'm not an employment lawyer, if you think about it in its very simplest form, where the work goes, the people have a right to follow that work. So if we were to move wholly to Homes in Somerset, all of the work goes there, and therefore all of the workforce associated with that work have a right to go there too. And similarly, in the other direction, the Homes in Somerset employees would have a right to follow that work into an in-house service. So they will be protected, and we are briefing them on what that means. And we're also setting up not only the launch briefings, but also frequently asked questions portal, so they can get an understanding of what it might mean for them and how 2P may or may not affect them. So we don't know what the answer is, but we're already getting some indications here in terms of, well, the Savills view on stock transfer means that this is not a large-scale voluntary stock transfer. We are looking at models that retain the stock in-house. That's the financial position, but executive, through the lead member, have also given us a steer that they want to retain the council housing stock. So their view also supports the Savills view on finances. And therefore, it is too soon to know what the outcome is, but it's likely to be that we either move wholly to an in-house service or wholly to Homes in Somerset. Those are the models realistically that are available to us that meet those criteria. Now, we're going to stay open-minded in case there are any governmental changes, but as part of the soft market testing exercise we've carried out for the external consultants, no one has yet come up with an alternative solution. They're both saying the reality is it's one of the other, especially as both of those are working currently. You don't need to do something more dramatic than that because there isn't a problem to fix. So retaining stock ownership is really key. In terms of next step, the project group did meet last week and we are finalising the scope for the external consultants. We will go to market quite quickly and we will start the launch project, start to launch the project with, as I've said already, tenants, members and employees in early May. There'll be a non-key decision taken by myself in terms of the authority to commence consultation process. It's more of a technicality, but that will happen. We'll engage with tenants over that summer period, and it will be a sustained piece of engagement activity. This is not a one-off. It'll be a large-scale piece of activity, and part of the specification and scope for the consultants is for them to articulate, with their given history, what that engagement process looks like, how long does it need to be, what are the methods of engagement, and so forth. We expect to receive a consultant's report and with a recommendation before Christmas. So we, as a project team, will have an understanding of their recommendation, and we will then prepare that for a formal report into the governance process. So through scrutiny, onwards to executive for a decision before April. That does not mean that we move everything on April the 1st. There are a large volume of people here. We need to get a decision in place, and we need to work out a transition plan. We expect the transition of the service to happen during 26-27, but until we know what the likely answer is, we can't fully scope that transition plan. The report will have it, of course, by the time members are asked to make a decision. And therefore, during 26-27, we will need to make that transition, assuming members make a decision. I see no reason why they wouldn't. And we need to consider what the impacts of that are on the HRA business plan, because as we head into December and onwards into budget setting, we will also be looking at a refresh of the HRA budget for 26-27 anyway, as part of the normal budget setting process. We'll be looking at the rent setting model, and we'll be looking at the 30-year business plan. The rent setting, to a degree, will happen regardless of the model, because it's irrelevant, and that we are not changing rents as a result of the model. But it does mean there's an awful lot of activity that has to happen in the lead up to Christmas and then beyond into member decision makings on budgets. So there's lots to be done behind the scenes. And then my last bullet point there is really around the engagement that the committee would like going forward. So it's worth thinking about how you would like to be engaged in this process. Is it simply I come back at set milestones and give you updates and refreshes? Would you like specifically to engage with the consultant? Would you like them to come and talk to you specifically about their intentions and their scope? It's an open question that you might want to answer now or take some time to think about. But otherwise, it's we want to make sure that scrutiny is properly engaged in this as it develops. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very clear and thorough presentation. And can we all be bearing in mind that final question that Chris has left with us? You know, how would we like to be involved with this matter going forward? Really appreciate the advanced sight of this. I think it's really helpful to know that this is about to happen. So thank you for coming to us at this early stage. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask Chris, what is the all members briefing we're going to get next week, I believe, then? Going to tell us that we don't already know in this room from your presentation this morning? Or is there no difference? Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair. It will look very similar to that briefing. So really what we're trying to do is ensure that scrutiny are correctly engaged in the process, because that's the right thing to do. Although that we aren't creating policy here, this is a big decision internally. It's less of a big decision externally, because there won't be big change for tenants, but it is a big change internally as to how we manage our services. So it's right to engage scrutiny in advance of that. We also want to ensure that all of our members are aware, so that we can prevent any mistruths getting out or any concerns from our residents and tenants who say, oh my goodness, I'm worried I'm going to lose my house, or I'm worried you're going to put my rent out. I want to be absolutely clear so that you can help support the message and support tenants. But I would encourage you to attend, but I can't say it's going to be dramatically different from the presentation I've just given.
Councillor Sankey. Thank you.
Just Hazel. Just a few questions, which is sort of general information, just to clarify my own mind. Is there parity on the rents in the two setups? So is a house in Taunton have the same type and size, the same rent as a house in Bridgewater? So, and also, do the two have exactly the same tenancy agreements already, or will, you know, obviously, if you have a tenancy agreement now, that can't be changed, but will there be a new sort of bringing together so that they are the same? So I know in Taunton, Somerset West and Taunton, we had introduced introductory tenancies. I didn't know whether Homes in Sedgemoor, whatever they're called, have done the same. So it's that sort of question: are the tenancy agreements the same, or will new tenants coming forward in the future maybe have a slightly different one? You talked about, is it the housing options team, which is a team I think that looks at where we develop? Is that, it's hosted by Homes in Somerset, whatever it's called? Who funds that? Is that, I'm not quite sure whether that's a general council funding or whether it's part of the HRA. I don't know. And also, can I just be assured that only the absolute costs of overheads are recharged to the two? Because I know at one stage it used to be, oh well, you know, the council housing function is it's half the turnover of the council, so they should pay for half of the chief executive and half of everybody, you know, whereas actually the actual work done on it by the chief executive was very small. And I know that did change, but people often moan like about grass cutting on previous council estates or on council estates. You know, the council tenants pay twice for the grass cutting. They pay for it once through their council tax, and they pay for it again through their rent, whereas people who live in the privately owned houses on the same estate pay for it only once in their council tax. So I just wanted to be assured that kind of we did bottom all of that out, and it's a lighter, a central burden on the HRAs as is possible. I'm sure it has been. I just want assurance. It's something I've banged on over the years many, many times about. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, through you. So in terms of rents and tenancy agreements, yeah, they are broadly similar. There are some slight differentials. So when we look at North Taunton Woolaway project, some of those have slightly different tenancy agreements because we've decanted them and then offered them a special ability to move back in. Some of the new tenants at North Taunton are on affordable rents rather than social rents, but where we have decanted a tenant that was on a social rent, they've moved out and they've moved back into a new property and they've kept that social rent protection. So there may be some slight differentials on new developments because of those interactions, but broadly the rents are very similar, if not the same, and tenancy agreements again the same. So we don't expect to see a change to anyone's rent or anyone's tenancy agreement. They remain protected as part of this. It's who turns up and who fixes the dripping tap or who manages the property, etc., that we're looking at in this term. It wasn't housing options. Sorry if I've said housing option, I didn't mean I meant housing development. So we transferred across the housing development team. So we have now one housing development service that are looking at acquisition and new build programmes. They are all hosted within Homes in Somerset. We did that because we had a skills gap within the in-house team. Again, there was duplication at the time, and I didn't want to fill the skills gap when we know that ultimately, one way or another, all of this is coming together at some point. So we took advantage of the skills that were available through Homes in Sedgemoor at the time, now Somerset. That what triggered the name, as I wanted a name that reflected the wider geography. So all of those are now hosted by Homes in Somerset, and all of that is funded through the HRA. There's no general fund element to that.
Just on. So if they would be looking at where we get social landlords, registered social landlords to provide, or would that be a function of the HRA?
So housing options deal with what is the housing option provision across Somerset, regardless of who owns it. They also manage Home Finder, they select tenants. That's a general fund activity. What we do within the HRA business plan is say, well, we've got this much stock to manage, and we've got an aspiration to build or buy through the capital programme this much stock. And that is funded by the HRA, including all of the staff that work there. So everybody who's helping support the build at Seaward Way, North Taunton, Oxford Inn, all of those people and the budgets all went across to Homes in Somerset as a much wider Somerset-wide team.
So the function of where you have a developer building out a large estate and 20%, say 25% is social housing, that's a separate issue dealt with by registered social landlords who want to come in and develop on those sites. How's that picked up in the global picture of Somerset?
So all of that sits under our housing options and enabling function that sits under Kirsty Larkin's team. So all of that is general fund. That's about what is it that we need for Somerset, regardless of who provides it. At the point at which it becomes provided by the HRA, then it becomes an HRA function and an HRA cost. And some of that is provided by the HRA and some of that is provided by other external registered providers.
So will the HRA be looking at moving into that sort of field of developing and doing those big scale developments that are part of, you know, I don't know, an urban extension somewhere or the other, where you see, you know, 1,000 houses being developed and maybe 200, 250 are going to be social housing, because the developer only provides the land, doesn't he?
Yeah, although quite a lot of our current acquisitions in the HRA acquisition programme are Section 106 properties, i.e. we are buying from the developer the proportion that they are required to provide and build. So they always provide those out to the council as well as other registered providers, and then we decide whether we're going to buy them or not. But we have to have the funding to buy them, and the funding comes from that housing revenue account. Absolutely, yeah, 112 I signed off last week as acquisitions. If I may, Chair, there's also a question about ensuring that the absolute line between the council's HRA finances and the general fund is there. So on an annual basis, we review all of the recharges. So there are parts of the service, you picked on the Chief Exec as an example, but there are a range of services that are provided into the HRA. And because the HRA is a separate legal and financial entity, then we purchase ICT services or payroll services or HR services. So we pay a recharge for that, and we review that on an annual basis with a service level agreement that says, well, if we're buying X number of ICT licenses, we agree in advance how much that's going to cost. So there is an absolute line between the cost of those and reviewed annually.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's obviously a very important subject and something we obviously need to keep an eye on, I think, really. I mean, you're asking about engagement of the committee. I would suggest that Chris comes back maybe on a quarterly basis or as and when required, maybe, or he feels there's a major change that we need to know about and discuss. Can I just leave that there then? We'll just give my response before I may leave because I need to be somewhere else. Thank you, Chris.
I just had a couple of questions, and you mentioned duplication a lot. I mean, potentially there's duplication in staff. Is this going to be a huge concern for staff? Is it a worry for them? And I was just trying to think, you know, where else are the potential savings? I mean, obviously it's economies of scale with any merger like that, but I'm just more concerned about where the staff will be feeling with this, and you know, have you got any indications of what duplication is currently taking place within the staffing? Appreciate that's obviously quite a sensitive subject. And then just a couple of other questions that have come up. You mentioned about the number of houses that have been purchased. Is that largely from developments that those purchases take place, or is it a whole across the board of properties? Where do we get most of our purchases within the HRA coming from? And in the same way, I didn't know we had HRA shops. What are we doing with shops, and what do those shops do?
Thank you. So in terms of duplication, yeah, we're as I said, we didn't include the HRA posts within the workforce restructure. I think the difference here is that the workforce restructure said the general fund needs to save a percentage of money, and we had cost envelopes in which to work, and broadly that saving was pitched at around 20 to 25%. Haven't set a savings target here because this needs to be driven by what service and what model best delivers for our customers, our tenants, because they are the ones directly funding it. The other thing within the general fund is that a saving made in the general fund can help support a pressure elsewhere. That's not the case in the HRA. If a saving is made in the HRA, the money stays in the HRA, and the HRA effectively decides where best to spend it. So it would be artificial to say, well, they need to make a saving in order to reinvest it, and they might choose to reinvest it in the place they just made the saving from. So we need to be really clear that there isn't a specific savings target associated with this project, but we do think there's duplication. We have different methods of contact for our tenants, everything from customer services through to our comms team. One side sends out a newsletter, the other side does a video blog. So there are duplication and things that can be learnt across the two. So customer services is one area, data, ICT licenses, yes, employees, all the way down to if a vehicle is going out to do some repairs, the routing of that vehicle and the kind of properties they cover, there is currently a line between the two stock holding authorities, or as was, and never shall they cross that line. Well, in future we need to look at how that routing works and how the management of that stock works. There are also differentials in delivery at the moment. So the in-house service, by default of the name, has an in-house trade team. The Homes in Somerset service have a contracted trade team. So we need to look at all of those. Some of those are consequences, some of those are opportunities. So actually, if we find that one model is working better to deliver for customers, we want to expand upon that. So we need to look at those things. There will be duplication in management. And the routing I've just talked about. So that was just a scribbled list, that's in terms of where do we think it is. But it's around the kind of more efficient operation. When we look at policy, we're already starting to combine our policy. Chris Brown, as the service director, who's now left the organisation, did a lot of work to combine the key performance indicators so that when we look at data from one operator, we can directly compare it to the other and compare apples with apples. So all of that now feeds via corporate and resources scrutiny and the key performance indicators and so we can actually look at the Somerset Council housing stock and compare performance across the two. So we've done that, but what we haven't yet done is align all of our policies. So we've started the work around policy alignment, which means that there are two effectively policy groups of people doing things separately to each other currently and in the structure. So there's opportunity there. You asked about purchases. So the ones I referred to last week are all Section 106 property purchases. They were agreed within the capital programme for the HRA that was signed off in the normal budget setting cycle. And within that appendix, you'll see the names of each of the locations. So it'll give you an indication to how many properties we're buying from which developments, but also identifies the money that we're spending on the redevelopment schemes. So the Oxford Inn, North Taunton Woolaway, Seawood Way, and so forth. So we don't purely acquire through 106. However, it is a mechanism of minimising risk for us because we can buy at a set rate and it's a discounted rate at that. So we can acquire relatively risk-free because they are fixed purchase prices. When you undertake a development, you are absolutely holding all of the risk as to what happens when you put the spade in the ground. So it's a blended approach of redevelopment of sites and acquisitions. And then linked to that, the council has also been purchasing properties through the local authority housing fund, excuse me, and that is money specifically from government for displacement. So we were given significant lumps of cash from government to go to the market and acquire properties. Some of those were new, some of those were properties that are just available in the marketplace that fits with our stock profile. So some of those might be repurchasing previous right to buy properties. But again, it allows us to expand the stock relatively quickly within the rules of the local authority housing fund. Those rules being that the first tenancy must be to someone from that recognised displaced community. After that, it goes into our general HRA stock holding and therefore supports those on the housing options register and list. And shops, yeah, there are a number of shops. if you look at the Roman Road and Holcombe Estate, there are a range of shops that exist there. There are some within Priorswood. They tend to be below flat blocks, so they are directly related to those estates. They were built as part of those estates, owned by the HRA and managed by the HRA as well.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to check then. So people that have a right to buy, that money goes back to the government when they, and then we have to go back in and buy it from via the HRA. No?
Not quite. So the council gets to keep, and we now get to keep 100% of the right to buy receipts and use 100% of the right to buy receipts. But the historically it was a share arrangement. But yeah, we now keep the right to buy receipts. So if we are required to sell a property under right to buy, the council keeps the money and can reinvest it in accordance with the capital programme. So when you look at what is it we're buying or building, there's a list, and then there is the funding that sits alongside of it. So some of it will be right to buy receipts, some of it might be grant from Homes England, some of it might be borrowing, and a lot of it is borrowing, but the borrowing is then serviced by tenant rents into the future. So it's all contained within the HRA. There's no borrowing that occurs for the acquisition or regeneration of properties that is funded by the general fund where they are council housing stock.
Sorry, I'm just being a bit dense here, I think then. So where you're saying you purchase right to buy properties, how is that operating?
So people buy their properties under right to buy, and at some point in their future they choose to sell them on the open market. The sort of stock that is easiest for us to manage is the stock that we know. So if we are buying from the open marketplace, purchasing back ex-council stock means that it's within an existing council estate, it's of an archetype that we know and understand, and it's quite convenient for us to purchase some of those.
Thank you. And do we end up paying an inflated price then from what they, I mean, what's the price differential in those situations?
We will be competing in an open marketplace, so you'll pay market rate. If someone is selling their house, the fact that it used to be a council house is irrelevant at that point. They are able to sell it for whatever the going market rate is, and if we choose to purchase it through one of those schemes, we have to pay the going market rate.
Thanks for that. Do we have a lot of right to buy still going through the system? Just what are the numbers generally?
So yeah, there was a considerable spike following the autumn statement and the changes to the right to buy discounts. So we would normally see somewhere around 30. At one point we had a peak of around 80 as we came out of that autumn statement. So we don't quite know what will happen going forward. We expect that anybody who was reasonably thinking about buying their council house probably came forward at that point in time because the discounts have now dropped. However, for those people who wish to acquire a property, buying it via the right to buy mechanism will still be one of the cheapest properties they can buy because it is still discounted. It's just not as discounted as it previously was. So we did see a spike. I anticipate we'll see a bit of a tailing off in this year, and then that will become the new normal, and we'll go back to probably a stable number of right to buys across Somerset.
Do we have any indications from government at all about them changing this right to buy process? Because I mean, we are so short of social housing and council properties.
No, not at this stage, and clearly they have only fairly recently made a change in terms of the discount. So no, there's no indication at this stage that they will alter the right to buy.
Sorry, that was some very general questions, not particularly related to the housing landlord option paper, but I believe Councillor Kravis had a question.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, thank you, Chris. So as ever, I made a few notes, but yeah, I think I mean, this is not, again, on that, it's a shame that we can, I always find it fascinating that we can, when given the money, from government, we can go and buy former council houses at whatever price they were, whatever the market went, but what we can't do is use some 50-year borrowing function to do the same, rather than build our own. I know it might be easier to build new, but as we all know, we're low on sites. But with regard to my question, I suppose, one thing I know what Homes in Sedgemoor is, or Homes in Somerset was, and but what I never quite know is the difference in control that we had over that, because obviously they have their CEO and there sort of was more of an it's my understanding, it was more of an arm's length thing. Has that changed at all? But I suppose my concern is with the process. I can understand why we're doing the options appraisal, etc. Is I know everybody will say, well, reorganisation was very smooth and all went very well. Well, yeah, there was a lot of pressure on a lot of people. A lot of things didn't get done that maybe would have got done because, we all got fed up of going to parish councils and saying, well, we haven't got anything to tell you because this restructure is all going on and everything else. My concern would be was how quick, because we're looking at April 2026, that's a year. How quick will this process drag on longer? Because my concern is that the service that the two housing providers provide for things like housing options, etc., and making decisions of tenants, etc., and who goes in, because that's the housing providers make that final decision rather than once housing options have, they suppose they still need a decision on whether the tenant's going to accept that, or whether the housing provider is going to accept that. So how do we prevent that? And I suppose distraction is the right word. How do we stop this becoming a distraction to two services so that actually the services still continue as they should be when providing, let's be honest, we're here to get people into homes and we don't want homes emptier longer than normal because everyone's getting distracted and decisions aren't being made. And it was interesting what you said about, I think it was Chris Brown, was it? With the sharing the data. Of course, we're talking about these two housing services or housing providers. What we're not talking about is the fact that we've got housing associations as well. So there will be still people who might be, and in classic case with Rainbow, I'm calling it Rainbow Way, not Seaward Way, very proud of that name, that are actually tenants of HOA where most people in West Somerset are tenants of Bagner or other housing associations. Apologies to Live West and others that I may have forgotten about. So then how do we, so we'll always have that issue where there are other housing providers out there, and there are indeed some private landlords, or private housing social landlords as well. How do we make sure that during this process, which I know will be, we will try and make it as smooth as possible, that it doesn't become a distraction, the service that it provides, at the bottom line is getting people into houses, doesn't slip. And how do we manage that and keep on top of that? Because as councillors, we've all had experience over the last couple of years of maybe not getting phone calls returned as quickly as they would have done in the past.
I think I could help really easily with that because housing options is not part of this process. So there will be no delay in decision making because it sits completely outside of this process. So all of the applications that go into Home Finder are administered by the housing options team in the general fund under Kirsty's area. Those decisions are reached. They determine who will go into what properties. Some of those will be Somerset Council's properties managed in-house. Some of those will be some homes in Somerset managed. Some of those will be Live West or Adbury and so on and so forth. So the decision making point sits completely outside of this, and we will allocate tenancies in the usual way. There should be no distraction as a result of this. Which kind of leads me on to the next point around kind of the governance arrangements. So the in-house service works much like any other part of the council. All of the internal governance arrangements are in place. Homes in Somerset is a company owned by us. So we are the sole shareholder, and we set the specification of their work effectively through the HRA business plan. We say what we want them to deliver for us, and then they go away and deliver it within the confines of the budget that we give them. So there should be no distraction in regards to this process for current or future tenancies, getting people into homes, void turnaround. All of those usual systems and processes should work as necessary. Transition, the point at which we say, well, we're selecting one of these models and now we're going to move to it. That's why I say I can't tell you yet how long that transition period needs to be, because I do think it might look different for each of the individual models. And that is the reason we're saying we want a decision by April. But this doesn't go live on the 1st of April. We're not just going to say, thank you very much. We've got a decision on the 20th of March and it all goes live. There are considerable complexities to be worked through in terms of how that works, how we communicate with tenants, how we ensure that everybody is aware of what's happening, and how behind the scenes we're managing the employment necessary requirements and all of the very detailed, well, what does that mean for who the employer will be? What does that mean for where they will work? What does that mean for the vehicle logoing? What does that mean for? There's a whole range of decisions that will need to drop out of that, and that's part of that transition planning exercise. In terms of risks and distractions to this project, the biggest risk and distraction to this project would be the housing regulators coming in and doing their regulatory audit. That would take up significant amounts of employee time and would distract the service. So that is a risk. It's not one that's within our control. The regulator will decide at what point they undertake that assessment. We're writing to the regulator to make sure that they understand what we're doing. And our hope is that they would choose not to come and do a regulatory inspection partway through this, but it's not in our control or gift. If they decide they're coming, they come, and we will have to manage in amongst that process. So regulatory inspection aside, we're reasonably confident with the timetables in terms of reaching a decision. I'm just looking if there are any others. So it's not about allocations. Oh, the other one you talked about, it's a shame we can't go back and go out and buy previous right to buy properties. Well, we absolutely can. The choice is that the best route for us? Sometimes it is because as I've said, we know the archetypes, they tend to be within the council estates that we know, but we also have to look at the future regulatory requirements on thermal efficiency. And a number of our housing stock, we are having to look at what does the capital programme do to improve thermal efficiency to ensure we can keep letting those. Would we go out and buy a new build house? Well, they're quite attractive at the moment through 106 in terms of values because they're discounted, or a right to, and they're very thermally efficient, or would we buy a right to buy, a previous council house at a market rate and then have to manage the thermal efficiency challenges coming forward? So we have to look at those. The only limitation on what we buy is the amount of money we can borrow, and the limitation on the amount of money we can borrow is how much debt can the HRA reasonably service, and interest rates being high is hindering us. If the interest rates were lower, we would have more headroom for borrowing and more ability to service that debt. So we are currently, the current capital programme is at its max. There is no more that we can borrow because we would not be able to service it currently in the current model.
I'll come back, but it's just because I'm aware that not my division, but in Watchet, there's private investment companies bought several of the new builds there, and obviously renting them out at not so affordable rents. And it just makes me wonder, well, if they can do it, why can't we do it? I know we're stuck with social rents, but you just talked about affordable rents earlier, because obviously we wouldn't necessarily be looking at a return on investment like perhaps they are. So just one of those it's one of those questions to throw in the pot while we're on the subject, really.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to the rents, doesn't it? Effectively, if they're doing this on a commercial basis, take a glance through Rightmove one afternoon when you're bored and look at the scary numbers that people are now demanding for rental properties. They are considerably higher, and that enables them to be able to purchase at market rates in a different way. We are rightly capped to social or affordable rents, and that will have a direct impact on our ability to service debt.
Councillor Prasanki.
Thanks. Just a quickie. When we buy from a developer, do we have an issue with size? Because I know when Somerset Western Taunton bought Pearland, or was it Taunton Dean even, the houses at Pearland Fields, there was a debate around, they weren't to the normal, is it the Parker standard or something? Is Parker Morrison? I don't, yeah. So whatever it is that an issue for us in terms of, do we look at the size, or is a 3-bedroom house a 3-bedroom house? And just while I've got the mic, and I promise this is my last ask, where we knocked down the council houses in my division, the flats at Wordsworth Drive, are we anywhere in the realm of beginning to look at what might happen to that? Just that people ask me quite a lot, and the answer I give is, well, we've got to wait to be able to get some government money to do it. And my understanding is that that's a 5-year fallow before we can even look at that. I just kind of want clarity on that.
So in terms of the minimum size standards, I can't remember the name of it, but there are a minimum size standards, and all of the properties we're acquiring meet those, including the ones that we're building. So we don't have any issues in that regard. And bearing in mind the ones that we're buying,
Councillor Kendall.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. Slightly confused a little bit, that's all. We talk about Taunton, Bridgewater and Mendip, HRA account and all this and all that. But then you're mentioning now and then Somerset wide in your speech today. How do you reflect over the whole of Somerset, not just this area around here of Mendip, Taunton and Bridgewater?
So the housing options, maybe that's where it keeps coming from. I don't mean that. The options appraisal is looking at the delivery model covering our current and future stock. Our current stock is predominantly in those two previous districts, but we have talked about acquisitions that go outside of those boundaries. So some of our acquisitions are no longer in the ex-Sedgemoor area or in the ex-Somerset West and Taunton area. So the intention here is to have whatever the future model is to be able to deliver on behalf of Somerset wherever we choose to build or wherever we choose to buy. So we are no longer governed by those boundaries. So I will always talk now in terms of Somerset wide. We don't have an inherited stock from the other two districts, so South Somerset and Mendip, but that doesn't prevent us from buying and managing stock in those locations subject to the business case.
Thank you. That's just, you've said what I wanted to hear. You're looking at the whole county. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did we have any further questions or? Thank you very much, Chris, for answering a rather broader range of questions than the proposal that was being brought to us. It's really helpful information for us all to understand some aspects that we don't have knowledge of so far. So I've learnt a lot. Thank you very much indeed. So we need to, as a committee, basically provide Chris with a steer as to how we want to take this forward. Just looking at the timetable, the review for tenants will happen over the summer, and I'm kind of wondering myself, is there anything else to be done prior to us getting some information from that review? For me, I mean, we could come back in a few months with an update, but for me, that update won't really have anything until we get the responses from the tenants review. Unless anyone feels any differently. I think it was December you were saying that would be finalised, the results of the review.
So we're hoping for a report with a clear recommendation before Christmas. Exactly how long that takes is kind of subject to how much response they get, of course, in engaging those tenants. So I could come back and provide you with something either in December if we've got it in time or in early January. It's entirely possible at that stage it might have to be a confidential item on this agenda because until the decision is made, there are a lot of employee impacts. So we have to be very careful when we talk about what's an option versus what's a proposal and the way in which we engage staff as part of that. But we can cross that bridge when we come to it. And if that's what you're seeking, we can program that in.
So I just basically need to hear from anyone if they feel that timetable should be any different from us maybe hearing December, the sort of first responses. Yeah, is everyone happy for us to wait till December when there's some information from that consultation? I can do a proposal for that. Do we need an official proposal for that, Jamie? No, okay. So that's our recommendation to you, Chris, but very much appreciate you bringing that to us today to give us some sight of what's coming forward. It's really helpful to be informed and to have had this discussion. So thank you very much. So I believe we are at the end of the meeting. We have future meetings still to be confirmed, so I can't give you any dates for the next meeting, but we're provisionally looking at maybe the middle of June, and you will receive those invitation obviously via Outlook. So just leaves me to thank Chris for all his contributions today and information and steering, and also to everyone for attending, and both online and in person. Thank you very much. We'll end the meeting at, what time is it? Has anyone got time on it? 11:49. Thank you very much.